The phone glowed in her trembling hand, the screen lighting up the dark bedroom again and again as she pressed his name, listening to the hollow ringing that ended in silence every single time. Midnight slipped past unnoticed, then 1 o'clock, then 2. Outside, the city slept. But inside her chest, panic refused to rest. She told herself the same lie over and over, that he was stuck somewhere, that his phone had died, that nothing was wrong, but each unanswered call chipped away at her certainty. With every vibration that ended in voicemail, her breathing grew heavier, her thoughts darker. She whispered his name into the phone like a prayer, not knowing that this night of waiting was quietly preparing her for a truth she had never imagined facing. She was not a woman who gave up easily. She believed in marriage, in patience, in loving someone through their worst moments. There had been arguments, distance, and strange silences lately, but she had convinced herself that every couple goes through seasons like this. That night, she replayed their last conversation again, and again his rushed goodbye, the way he avoided explaining where he was going, the coldness in his voice that she had ignored because love made excuses for him. As the hours dragged on, fear slowly replaced hope. Her calls were no longer just about wanting him home, they became desperate attempts to hold onto a life that felt like it was slipping out of her hands. By the time the sky began to lighten outside her window, she didn't yet know what the morning would bring, but deep down, she felt it. Whatever she would discover when the sun rose was going to change her life forever. The night refused to end. Every minute stretched longer than the last, as if time itself had slowed to watch her unravel. She sat on the edge of the bed, phone clutched in both hands, staring at the screen like it might suddenly come alive and explain everything. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the distant sound of a car passing somewhere outside. Normally, these sounds comforted her, reminders that the world was still moving. Tonight, they felt mocking. He was supposed to be home hours ago. He had said he would call. He always said that. She stood up and began pacing, barefoot on the cold floor, walking from the bedroom to the living room and back again. With every step, memories surfaced, small moments she had ignored, brushed aside, forgiven too easily. The way he had started guarding his phone like it held secrets that could burn. The sudden late nights, the unexplained anger, the way his apologies had become shorter and less sincere. She had convinced herself that love meant patience, that loyalty meant enduring confusion. But now, alone in the silence, those justifications felt thin and fragile. She tried calling again. Straight to voicemail. Her thumb hovered over the screen after the call ended, trembling. She typed a message, erased it, typed again. "Please just tell me you're okay." She sent it, then immediately regretted the desperation in her words. The message showed as delivered. No reply. Her chest tightened, and she pressed her palm against it, trying to steady her breathing. A dull ache settled behind her eyes, the kind that warned tears were coming whether she wanted them or not. She wandered into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, forgetting to drink it. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark window above the sink, eyes wide, face pale, hair pulled into a messy knot she didn't remember tying. She barely recognized the woman looking back. When had she started looking this tired? When had waiting become such a normal part of her life? The clock on the microwave read 3:17 a.m. She leaned against the counter, closing her eyes, and allowed herself to remember how different things had been once. There was a time when nights like this didn't exist, when she never questioned where he was or whether he would answer her calls. He used to rush home just to tell her about his day, used to text her for no reason at all. She wondered when exactly that version of him had disappeared and whether he ever really existed the way she remembered. Her phone buzzed suddenly, making her gasp. Her heart leapt into her throat as she looked down, expecting his name. It wasn't him. It was a notification from a social app she barely used. The disappointment hit harder than she expected, sharp and humiliating. She sank into a chair, the weight of the night pressing down on her shoulders. She felt foolish for hoping, foolish for caring this much, but she couldn't stop. Love, once given, doesn't turn off just because it's hurting you. She opened their message thread again and scrolled upward, reading old conversations from months ago. Inside jokes. Heart emojis. Plans for the future. Promises that felt sincere at the time. Her throat tightened as she realized how long it had been since he'd spoken to her that way. When was the last time he asked how she was feeling? When was the last time he listened without distraction? Another hour passed. The sky outside the window began to soften, black fading slowly into a deep, bruised blue. Dawn was approaching, and with it came a strange sense of dread. She had always believed morning brought clarity, that daylight exposed lies and made things easier to understand. But now she feared what clarity might bring. Whatever had kept him away all night, whatever he was choosing over coming home, felt like it was about to reveal itself. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message. Not from him but from an unknown number. Her breath caught as she opened it, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. The message was short, casual, and devastating in its simplicity. Is this his wife? You deserve to know where he really is. Her vision blurred instantly. The room felt like it was tilting, the walls closing in. She read the message again, hoping she had misunderstood it. 1,000 questions flooded her mind at once, but before she could respond, another message arrived. A photo loaded slowly on her screen, each second stretching unbearably long. When it finally appeared, her heart shattered into pieces she didn't know could exist. There he was, smiling, relaxed. Somewhere far from home. Far from her. Sitting beside someone else as if he had no worries in the world. A sound escaped her that she didn't recognize, half sob, half gasp. She covered her mouth with her hand, tears spilling freely now. All the unanswered calls, all the silence, all the excuses suddenly aligned into one brutal truth. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't bad timing. This was betrayal, laid bare in the pale light of early morning. She slid down onto the floor, back against the couch, foam clutched to her chest like it might burn through her skin. The woman she had been hours ago, the one who waited, hoped, made excuses, felt impossibly distant now. In her place sat someone new, someone broken open by truth. The night she had spent calling her husband hadn't brought him home. Instead, it had brought her face to face with a reality she could no longer ignore. As the first rays of sunlight crept into the room, she realized this morning wasn't just the end of a long, painful night, it was the beginning of something else entirely, a reckoning she never asked for. But one that would change her life forever. She didn't remember standing up, but suddenly she was in the bathroom, gripping the edge of the sink as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Her reflection stared back at her again. But this time there was no confusion in her eyes, only shock and something sharper, more dangerous. Truth. Cold water ran over her wrists as she tried to steady herself, but nothing could wash away the image burned into her mind. The smile on his face. The ease in his posture. The way he looked like a man with nothing to hide. Her phone vibrated again. Another message from the unknown number. An address. A short sentence followed, "He's been here all night." She stared at the screen for a long time before locking it and setting the phone down, as if distance might dull the pain. Her body felt heavy, exhausted from hours of worry that now felt naive. Every memory from the past few months replayed itself, but this time with new meaning. The cancelled plans. The sudden privacy. The nights he claimed work had kept him late. She saw it all clearly now, like a puzzle that had finally snapped into place. She dressed slowly, mechanically, pulling on clothes without caring how they looked. The sun was fully up now, flooding the room with light that felt cruel in its brightness. This was supposed to be a normal morning, breakfast, routines, familiar comfort. Instead, she moved through the house like a stranger, touching walls and furniture as if she might soon have to leave it all behind. Each step echoed with a question she couldn't escape. How long has this been my life without me? Knowing her phone buzzed again, this time it was his name. Her heart jumped despite everything. Instinct overriding reason. She answered without speaking. On the other end, his voice sounded tired, casual, almost annoyed. He said her name like nothing had happened, like he hadn't ignored her all night. He started explaining before she could ask. Traffic, a friend. A phone issue, lies stacked neatly on top of each other. Delivered with practiced ease, she listened in silence, something inside her growing very still. When he finished, she spoke softly, almost calmly, asking him where he really was. There was a pause. A fraction of a second too long. Then his tone shifted. Defensive, sharp. He accused her of overreacting, of invading his privacy, of not trusting him enough. The words washed over her, familiar weapons she had endured before. But this time, they didn't land the same way. She told him she had seen the photo, silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. When he finally spoke again, his voice was different, controlled, careful. As if he were choosing each word to maintain power. He didn't apologize, he didn't deny it either. He minimized it, reframed it. Suggested she was misunderstanding something that didn't need to be complicated. The realization hit her harder than the betrayal itself. This wasn't just about another woman. This was about who he had become and who he thought she was. She hung up without waiting for him to finish. Her hands were shaking. But her mind felt eerily clear. She sat down on the edge of the bed and allowed herself to cry. Not the quiet tears of fear from the night before, but deep, aching sobs that came from somewhere far inside her. She cried for the love she thought she had, for the trust she had given freely, for the version of herself that believed loyalty would be enough. Hours passed in fragments. She ignored calls and messages, letting the phone vibrate itself into silence. At some point, she opened the curtains fully and let the light in, as if refusing to hide any more. She made coffee she didn't drink. She sat by the window and watched people pass by, all of them living their lives unaware that hers had just split into a before and an after. By afternoon, the shock began to wear off, replaced by a deep, aching anger. Not explosive, not loud, but steady and resolute. She began to ask herself questions she had avoided for years. Why had she accepted so little? Why had she learned to doubt herself instead of his behavior? Why had she been so afraid of losing him that she lost pieces of herself instead? When he finally came home, the air in the house changed instantly. He stood in the doorway like someone uncertain whether he was welcome, scanning her face for emotion he could use. She didn't give him the satisfaction. She looked at him calmly, taking in the details she had once overlooked, the way his eyes avoided hers, the way his confidence cracked just enough to reveal fear underneath. He tried again to explain, to control the narrative, to make himself the misunderstood victim of circumstance. She listened without interrupting. then asked him a single question that cut through everything. She asked him when he stopped caring. Whether he hurt her, the question hung between them, unanswered, and in that silence, she understood something vital. The night she spent calling him wasn't just about his absence, it was about her awakening. The morning that followed didn't just change her life, it gave her back the clarity she had been missing. And for the first time, she began to understand that what came next would depend not on his choices, but on hers. The house felt different after that conversation, as if the walls themselves had absorbed everything that had been said and left unsaid. He moved around cautiously, like someone unsure of his footing, while she remained still, watching him with eyes that no longer searched for reassurance. The familiar rhythm of their shared space was gone. Every sound, the clink of a glass, the creak of the floor felt amplified, heavy with meaning. She realized how often she had filled silence before, how much effort she had put into keeping things normal. This time, she let the quiet speak. He tried to act ordinary, asking if she had eaten, commenting on how tired he was, as if exhaustion excused betrayal. She nodded politely, responding with the bare minimum, her mind far away, inside. Something was shifting. The fear that had ruled her night was giving way to something steadier, more grounded awareness. She began noticing details she had once ignored, the way he watched her reactions, the calculation behind his words, the subtle impatience when she didn't respond the way he expected. This wasn't a momentary mistake, this was a pattern. Later, alone in the bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed and opened her phone again. She scrolled through messages from friends she hadn't replied to in weeks, calls she had missed because she was too busy managing his moods. One name caught her attention, someone she used to confide in before she learned to keep things to herself. Her thumb hovered over the screen, then pressed call. When the voice on the other end answered, warm and familiar, her composure cracked. She didn't tell the whole story. She didn't have to. Just saying out loud that something was wrong felt like releasing a breath she had been holding for years. As the day faded into evening, memories surfaced uninvited. Not the good ones, but the moments that had made her uneasy long before this night. The first time he dismissed her concerns as overthinking, the first apology that came with blame attached, the subtle ways he had isolated her, questioning her friendships, her instincts, her worth. She saw now how carefully it had all unfolded, how slowly her world had narrowed until it revolved entirely around him. He knocked on the bedroom door softly, asking if they could talk. She agreed, not because she felt obligated, but because she wanted to hear him with new ears. He sat across from her, choosing his words carefully, framing himself as flawed but misunderstood. He spoke about stress, temptation, loneliness, everything except accountability. As he talked, she felt something unexpected, detachment. His words no longer had power over her. They sounded rehearsed, hollow, like lines he had practiced before. When he finished, she asked him to stop. She told him she wasn't interested in explanations anymore. What she wanted was honesty, real honesty, without excuses or manipulation. For a moment, she thought he might finally offer it. Instead, he grew defensive, accusing her of changing, of becoming cold, of tearing the marriage apart. The irony almost made her laugh. She realized then that he wasn't afraid of losing her love, he was afraid of losing control. That night, she didn't sleep beside him. She lay awake alone, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain begin to fall outside. Each drop against the window felt like punctuation to her thoughts. She wasn't planning an escape yet. She wasn't making dramatic decisions. She was simply observing, learning, reclaiming her ability to trust herself. And in that quiet realization, she felt stronger than she had in a very long time. By morning, she knew one thing with certainty. The woman who had spent the night calling her husband, begging for reassurance, no longer existed. In her place was someone who had seen the truth and could not unsee it. Whatever came next would not be easy, but it would be honest, and for the first time, honesty felt like freedom. The following days unfolded slowly, each one carrying a strange mix of heaviness and clarity. She went through familiar routines, waking up, making the bed, preparing meals, but everything felt altered, as if she were living inside the same life with a completely different awareness. He tried to return to normalcy, acting as though time alone would soften what had happened. He laughed at the television, spoke about work, even suggested they go out together, but his efforts only highlighted how deeply disconnected they had become. She watched him with a calm she didn't recognize, noting how uncomfortable he seemed with her silence, how much he relied on her emotional reactions to feel secure. At night, when the house grew quiet, her thoughts grew louder. She replayed conversations from years ago, moments that had unsettled her, but that she had buried under compromise and hope. She remembered times she had questioned his behavior and been told she was too sensitive, too suspicious, too emotional. Back then, she had believed him. Now, she saw those moments for what they were, early warnings she had been trained to ignore. The realization hurt, but it also strengthened her resolve. She wasn't imagining things. She never had been. One afternoon, while he was out, she opened a drawer she hadn't touched in a long time. Inside were old photographs, handwritten notes, small reminders of who she used to be before her world began shrinking. She sat on the floor, surrounded by fragments of her past, and allowed herself to feel grief not just for the marriage she thought she had, but for the parts of herself she had slowly set aside. Dreams postponed, friendships neglected, confidence eroded bit by bit. She understood now that betrayal doesn't always arrive suddenly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as compromise. When he came home that evening, he sensed the shift immediately. She was calmer, more distant, and that unsettled him more than anger ever had. He asked her what she was thinking. She answered honestly, telling him she was thinking about herself for the first time in a long while. The words caught him off guard. He tried to pull the conversation back toward guilt and reconciliation, reminding her of shared history, of promises made. She listened respectfully, but her heart no longer raced. She had crossed an invisible line inside herself, one that made going back impossible. Over the next few days, she began reaching outward again. She met a friend for coffee and spoke more freely than she had in years. She didn't share every detail, but she didn't hide the truth either. With each conversation, she felt lighter, as though she were reclaiming pieces of her voice. She noticed how different it felt to be believed without question, to be supported without conditions. It reminded her of what healthy connection was supposed to feel like. At home, the tension grew. He oscillated between remorse and irritation, between promises to change and subtle attempts to undermine her confidence. She recognized the pattern now. When he sensed he was losing influence, he became kinder, more attentive. When he felt it slipping further, he grew cold. This awareness protected her. She no longer reacted impulsively. She observed, stored information, and trusted her instincts. One night, as they sat across from each other in the living room, she told him she needed space, not as punishment, but as clarity. The request angered him more than she expected. He accused her of abandoning the marriage, of giving up too easily. She responded quietly, telling him that staying silent for years had been the hardest thing she had ever done. The room fell silent after that. He had no answer. Later, alone in the dark, she felt fear try to return, fear of the unknown, fear of starting over, fear of being alone. But this time it didn't consume her. She reminded herself that she had already survived the worst part the moment when the truth shattered her illusions. Everything beyond that was just rebuilding. And rebuilding, she realized, was something she was capable of. As the days passed, her sense of self grew steadier. She began to imagine a future not defined by waiting, doubting, or enduring. A future where love didn't require self-erasure. She didn't yet know what that future looked like, but for the first time, it felt possible. And in that quiet certainty, she understood that the morning that changed her life forever wasn't the end of her story. It was the moment she finally chose herself. The decision did not arrive all at once. It formed slowly, quietly, in the spaces between words and glances, in the moments when she realized how little she recognized the life she was living. She began noticing how her body reacted to him now, the tension in her shoulders when he entered a room, the shallow breathing when his tone changed, the instinctive need to protect her thoughts. These reactions were answers she could no longer ignore. Her body had understood the truth long before her mind had allowed it. One evening, she sat alone at the dining table with a notebook in front of her. The pages still blank, she hadn't planned to write. But her hand moved on its own. She wrote down moments that hurt, moments that confused her, moments she had forgiven without receiving understanding in return. Seeing them laid out in ink made everything undeniable. This wasn't one night. It wasn't one betrayal. It was a pattern that had slowly rewritten who she was allowed to be. When he came home, he noticed the notebook and asked what she was doing. She closed it calmly and told him she was thinking. That answer irritated him. He wanted access to her thoughts the way he always had. When she didn't give it, he grew restless. He tried to provoke a reaction, accusing her of being distant, of punishing him. She listened. Then told him she wasn't punishing anyone, she was protecting herself. The word seemed to anger him more than anything else she had said before. He laughed dismissively and told her she was being dramatic, that every marriage went through rough patches. She looked at him steadily and said that pain only becomes normal when people are taught to accept it. Her voice didn't shake. That was when he realized something had truly changed. Over the next few days, she began preparing, not dramatically, not loudly, but deliberately. She gathered documents, she saved important contacts, she made quiet plans without announcing them. There was no rush, no panic. This was not escape fueled by fear. It was movement guided by clarity. Each small step brought a strange sense of calm, as if she were aligning herself with something she had neglected for far too long. He sensed the distance growing and responded the way he always did when control slipped by becoming affectionate. He apologized again, this time with tears, promises, and declarations of love. He spoke about the future, about change, about how he couldn't imagine life without her. She listened, her heart aching not because she believed him, but because she wished it were enough. She realized then that love without safety was not love at all. One night, she told him she needed time apart. Not forever, not yet, but space to breathe, to think, to heal. The room went still. His face hardened, and the kindness vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He accused her of betrayal, of giving up, of destroying everything they had built. The words hurt, but they no longer controlled her. She understood now that someone who truly cared would not fear her independence. She packed a small bag and stood by the door, her heart pounding, but her mind steady. This was the hardest step, not because she doubted her decision, but because it marked the end of a version of herself she had outgrown. As she stepped outside, the night air felt different, cooler, lighter, like a beginning rather than an ending. At her temporary refuge, surrounded by quiet and unfamiliar walls, she finally allowed herself to rest. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deeper than she had known in years. For the first time in a long time, there was no tension waiting for her in the dark. No unanswered calls. No fear of saying the wrong thing. Just silence and peace. In the days that followed, waves of emotion came and went. Grief, anger, relief, doubt, hope. She learned to let them pass without judgment. She spoke with people who listened without trying to fix her. She began reconnecting with parts of herself that had been buried under survival. Each day, she felt a little stronger, a little clearer. She didn't know yet what the final outcome would be, reconciliation or separation, closure or confrontation, but she knew something far more important. She had stopped waiting for someone else to choose her. She had chosen herself, and that choice, once made, could never be taken away. The morning she woke up without checking her phone first felt unfamiliar, almost unsettling. For so long, her days had begun with anxiety, wondering if there would be messages to decode, moods to anticipate, silence to endure. Now, there was nothing demanding her attention. The quiet was no longer threatening, it was gentle. She lay still for a moment, listening to her own breathing, realizing how rare it had been to feel this present in her own life. Over the following weeks, she rebuilt her days piece by piece. Not in grand gestures, but in small, deliberate acts. She went for walks without explaining where she was going. She ate meals when she was hungry, slept when she was tired, spoke when she had something to say. These simple freedoms felt revolutionary. Each one reminded her that she was not selfish for having needs. She was human. He continued to reach out, sometimes apologetic, sometimes angry, sometimes pleading. His messages arrived like echoes from a life she was slowly leaving behind. She read some, ignored others, and eventually stopped feeling the urge to respond at all. The power his words once held had dissolved. She understood now that closure didn't require his understanding or approval. It required her acceptance of the truth. One afternoon, she sat by a window watching rain fall softly against the glass, thinking about that night, the endless calls, the silence, the moment her world cracked open. What once felt like the worst night of her life now appeared differently, painful, yes, but also necessary. If the phone had never gone unanswered, if the truth had remained hidden, she might still be waiting, still shrinking herself to keep peace. The realization brought tears to her eyes, not of sadness, but of gratitude. She began to imagine a future again, not one defined by someone else's choices, but by her own values. A future where love felt safe, where honesty didn't require investigation, where peace wasn't something earned through endurance. She didn't rush toward it, she allowed herself time. Healing, she learned, was not about forgetting, it was about understanding without self-blame. When she finally spoke to him face to face again, weeks later, it was brief and calm. She thanked him not for what he had done, but for revealing what she could no longer ignore. He looked at her like someone meeting a stranger, unsure how the woman he once controlled had slipped beyond his reach. She wished him nothing aloud, because she no longer needed to. She walked away without anger, without fear, carrying only clarity. As she stepped back into her life fully, she realized something quietly powerful. The night she called him again and again had not been a moment of weakness, it had been the last time she abandoned herself. The morning that followed didn't just change her life, it returned it to her. And as she moved forward, steady and whole, she understood this truth deeply. Sometimes the silence that breaks your heart is the very thing that teaches you how to listen to yourself. As this story comes to an end, one truth remains clear. The night she spent calling him wasn't a moment of weakness. It was the moment her life demanded her attention. What felt like abandonment became awakening. What felt like loss became clarity. She didn't survive by being louder or stronger than him, she survived by finally listening to herself. And in doing so, she chose peace over pain, truth over comfort, and self-respect over waiting for love that never arrived. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of your own journey, or opened your eyes to the quiet signs we often ignore, please subscribe to this channel. We share real, emotional stories that reflect life's hardest moments and the strength it takes to rise from them. Like, share, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that may help someone feel less alone. Your support helps these stories reach those who need them most.